Hello to my talk on how player feedback should influence your game's design. I'm Thomas, and why did I choose this topic? Well, I want people to avoid two extremes. On the one hand, to follow player feedback blindly when they get it, and on the other one, to completely disregard player feedback because they know what game they want to make, they don't need to get feedback for that. I'd recommend to stay in your personal Goldilocks zone. And yes, this is off center on purpose because in general you want to listen more to feedback than to ignore it. Before we head into that, let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Thomas Köstl. I've been working in GDL since autumn last year. I've been in professional enterprise software development for 12 years, into game development since high school, and I've been an avid gamer since I was 4 years old. I am also currently working on a solo game dev project. I hope to show something soon-ish, in the next months at least. Thank you. And also, I am currently in the process of quitting my job, and since it's the perfect time in game development, I want to become a full-time game developer, game designer hopefully, but maybe something with game production as well to apply my skills. So if you got anything for me, hit me up after the talk.
Do you need money?
Currently not, I have some leeway now. Yeah, about myself, I'm still playing way too many and way too much video games. So much, in fact, that I even started tracking my playtime and do elaborate end of the year infographics and statistics about it. But at least now I can say it's not an obsession anymore. Now it's research. So before we go into player feedback, let's talk quickly about some tips how to handle personal feedback you get in general. Yep. First up, try to be polite when you get feedback, be approachable, be appreciative that you get the feedback, and just go and watch Darren's 5 do's and don'ts talk. He pretty much covers everything about this topic that I would say today. It's generally a very good topic, direct YouTube link to this. Yeah, and other than that, I just say study up on general open communications tips and best practices. It is a hard skill to learn, but it is a skill you can learn and train. But it takes time and patience, I'd say. And when you get player feedback, always keep in mind it's not about you as a person, it's not about the work you do, it's about the player's experience. I don't want to excuse any bad behavior on the player's part in that regard, and any very subjective, not very positive feedback you get. But maybe this lens will help you see it from the objective side. Because the player's experience is the source of their feedback. It's very biased, it's driven by their emotions. And it's something you're responsible as a game designer for. Because as a game designer, and solo developers are also game designers of their games, it is to create systems that create a certain experience for the player. And for that it is important that you know what the game's direction should be, to know what the experience should be, and to know what the game is you're aiming for. Depending on the state and the progress of the project, that can be very unclear, and that's of course where feedback can help. But it's it's your decision to steer it in the way you think you should go with it. For an easy explanation, I prepared a metaphor. Let's say you're a solo game dev, and creating your game is like sitting in a rowboat. You already know your destination, you created a perfect design, and you say, yeah, that's going to be a great game, I'm going to make it exactly as that. Now, your left hand steers with your own design and innovation, the way you think that's right, and the other hand is validating that information through player feedback. If you go too much in just one direction, you veer off somewhere else entirely, which still could be good, but is definitely the thing you probably aim for. I'd say better to mix these two paths and get feedback regularly. That's a tip you hear all the time. But also still to stay true to the game you still aim for, and not get too much driven in a direction you weren't aiming for. I mean, it could still be a good game, but if you're on a budget, it's not the same thing that you wanted to work on. And yeah, like in the beginning, just avoid this. If you veer too much in one direction, you're probably just going in circles and not going to end up with a great game or a game at all. On to player feedback now. With a little disclaimer, when I talk about feedback here, I mean like feedback and not bug reports. If a player gives you a feedback that if you use this skill, your game crashes, that is a very important information, but that is a bug report, not really feedback. If the player says, when I use this skill, this thing that I suspected should happen doesn't happen, that can be a feedback, it can be both. It's for you to investigate. In general, what, at least in my opinion, you hear not often enough is that feedback context is very important when you get it. When you get feedback in different situations, it is, as I said, from the player's experience, and the experience is very much influenced by certain contexts. Like I said, the situation itself. If you get feedback during a live event, like Gamescom, or in a controlled playtest, or at Steam Next Fest, you will get very different feedback. On the one hand, the playtime is varying wildly, and in a situation like at Gamescom, it's a very hyped up environment, everybody loves to be there, it is also probably really exhausted, and we get very, very, very good feedback. There are also just personal biases you have to think about. These are more obvious, like age, gender, ideological beliefs. You will get different feedback from people who play games mainly with their children and from these dude bros here. Similar to this is also the topic of a player fit. That is not often regarded in indie development, I think. That's when you get feedback from a player who is never really meant to play your game or wants to veer your game in a different direction than you wanted to make, but you both really don't know that. It can be obvious in some cases when you get feedback in early stages. For example, when they are fans of survival games and they say, yeah, you really should add some mechanics like this in your game, but you're making a platformer and it doesn't really make sense. But sometimes it's not as obvious, especially when we're talking about stuff like expectations in complexity. For one gamer, your game may be too complex. For another one, it can be too simple. They just saw your game, expected something, and the reality was quite different. And you don't really know that beforehand. It's often very hard to analyze that. That is why big companies, when they do surveys, they always ask you, what other games did you play in this kind of genre to evaluate this kind of feedback. Similar to a player fit is also the topic of video game literacy. Just to clarify what I mean by this, let's do a quick audience check. Show of hands, please. Who here thinks they know what this would represent in a video game? Okay, I'd say half, maybe 2/4, 2/3. Yeah, the fact that you know this, or you think that you know this, and I think you probably do, refers to video game literacy, and it defines the ability for a player to understand, comprehend, analyze, and interpret a game's systems and the game's communication to the player. This also encompasses knowledge you gained from previous gaming experiences. This example, it would refer to a very common pattern now, a set of mechanics that just represent health, some kind of magic system, and some kind of stamina system. It also refers to the knowledge that this is a completely untraversable object for this character. And yeah, I see some mods. Yeah, doesn't really need explanation for anyone who knows it. For anyone who does not know it, this character nowadays says, well, I can't get past it, need to find another way. That's because video game literacy works on also a broad spectrum. People who've played many games see these patterns automatically, new players don't see them. This is of course just an invisible wall from the level design perspective, but it looks more real this way. And when you get player feedback, when I talk about player feedback and feedback context, still always remember, even if the context doesn't really fit what you're searching for, all feedback is valid and all of it is valuable to you, but it's still you who decide how relevant it is. In addition to the feedback context, what also important is player data, often just contained in telemetry data or more commonly known, talked about as part of telemetry data, which mostly covers, in its definition, hardware specs and technical details about the play environment, which are helpful, but it often also contains just things the player does. Maybe some of you have seen screens like these in very choice-driven games. This is just a basic example of how many players chose choice A and not choice B, just a representation for other players, but of course they gather way more data than this. In the background, in more complex games, you should definitely gather some kind of data this way, like how often did a player choose this skill in this amount of time, and just general player behavior, not just their simple choices. Because with this data, you can get way more context for what the player feedback was if you can match it. In a controlled playtest setting, you could also, of course, record player footage and then match that. But before you do that, think about how much longer this takes to analyze. As a software developer, I can tell you how important it is to do this kind of data gathering or just data logging in the long run, and you should invest early on in games production to set this up correctly for your game, the way you get the most information. And as I said, it can also help just in demo processes. For example, when you log on when you're on the floor and you have 2 testing stations, you can log how long a player played in one session. When did players just walk off? Did they complete the demo? What did they do in that time? Additional logging helps very much with that. When we do this kind of thing, it's also very important to do proper data interpretation, because the data is just facts, it can still mislead, and you should investigate either beforehand to really log in a certain way, track in a certain way just the data you need, or do this investigation after it, why the data is the way it is. For example, in the Slay the Spire roguelike deck building game, this card was way overrepresented in winning decks. And the developers saw that and investigated. Maybe they need to rebalance the card, maybe too many decks required this card. And they just found out that no, not really. Most decks that had this card and were winning the game just had very good decks before they got this card, because they only got this card near the end of the game. And it was not really a matter of rebalancing this card, just maybe distributing the way you get this card over the game better. Yeah, we can definitely learn from this that even in such cases where it seems maybe pretty clear, you should still investigate. Great. Then let's head into the influence on game design. So when we apply what we learn from feedback, I would go with these kind of steps. First off, we sort and define all the feedback we got for example, after we did an event somewhere and got some feedback from some players. Sort and define the core feedback information where you can group up certain aspects, and after that we refine it with the context and data we have. This is already the point where we maybe even some things we grouped up, maybe we need to split up now depending on the data, depending on the context, to really gather the important parts you need to investigate later on. For example, maybe some players had an issue with the boss that it was too easy, maybe some players had an issue with it that it was too hard. And when you have enough data, you can see, oh, some players did not use one specific skill at all, and some used the whole repertoire you have already available in your game. After that, the hard part, identifying the issue and the real problem source. This is a very case-by-case basis. It maybe get more clear in the example I prepared after that. With this, you really need to think outside of the one specific feedback. If a player said, yeah, the boss was too easy, you don't just make the boss just have more health, make it harder. Really investigate why did the player think it was too easy. There are probably multiple possible reasons. So it really depends on your game and on the specific feedback, the way you should handle this. But you should always look around the feedback you get, look at the proper system around it. Yeah, when we found the real problem, we need to design a solution for that. It should ideally resolve the source problem, not just the feedback. It should, of course, should also resolve the feedback with it, but if you found this true solution, you should be maybe more focused in your design and your direction than just solving this one feedback. And after that, we just apply the solution to the game and verify it, of course, in future playtests, again with new feedback. So now to an example. Maybe makes this a little bit easier to understand. I have a real practical example from a real game. It's still in development. It's from a real game designer, but I can't name any names because it's still on NDA. Let's just say the game was or is a 3D platformer with action elements and boss battles. The feedback they got was this one specific boss has too much health. It was way too strong. It took too long to defeat. The context for it was an internal playtest by employees, but none of the development team. They were just working at the same company. So we can also already gather from that a certain literacy skill because they were part of previous tests, they knew games, and also they were not personally biased that much because it was part of their work to do that. But gladly, we also have the data in this case because they did record the playtest sessions, so it is very easy for them to find the proper solution, to find the true source of the problem, which was the players did not use an intended counter move they should against the boss. When the boss did his animation tell, and did his move, they just evaded and tried to kill the boss with basic attacks, which wouldn't work because it wasn't designed that way at the time. So, some possible solutions now that we know what the source problem is. A, to balance the numbers to make this an option, to make this growth attrition possible. You see all the time that players play Dark Souls games with level 1 and stuff like that. You could make this in your game. B, force the player to use the counter move, make it a game over otherwise. Maybe the boss just kills you instead of that you can evade the attack. Or you do this, what some games do now, that you do a forced slow-mo and you need to press this button, otherwise you can progress in the game. Would be one way. We teach the player to use the counter move with some additional tutorial beforehand, with some better UI prompts or additional text in some way. Or we redesign the boss without this move at all, maybe with some substitute gimmick. Yeah, that's probably a way more complicated solution, but it is a solution depending on what kind of game you want to do. This is also why I'd say there is no right solution here. These are just possible solutions. It really depends on the game direction. I don't know the game direction, and I would advise to, depending on that, to choose a different solution depending on it. In this case, they did a kind of option C. They had this boss introduction sequence, so a cutscene, and they just added this animation, and the player avatar did this counter attack, added it to the cutscene. So immediately when the boss fight really started, it was on the player's mind, they knew what to do, without being told what to do. Yeah. Now we're heading into the end. I will just want to reiterate the things I talked about here and cover also some more common pitfalls. Yeah, first, find the proper solution of the problems. Don't do clear, easy, don't do fast and easy responses to feedback. Investigate the source always. Definitely don't appease to all feedback. Think of your game's direction and filter for relevancy. Something I didn't get into because of the time constraints is be aware of vocal minorities and echo chambers. If you get feedback just from your Discord server, you will get very biased very quickly. Don't get misled by data. Properly investigate when you have any play data, why the data is the way it is. Maybe at the start of the project you started to log some things that later on you reinterpret in a completely different way because you changed some systems and forgot to adapt your data gathering in that way. And still, most important of all, do not ignore it. Always listen to feedback, maybe filter and evaluate it, but still always listen to it. It really is, even with all the validating, it is the most important part, I think. Yeah, with that, I thank you for your time. If you have any feedback for me for this talk, I have a form here. Maybe it's too close to scan it now. And if you want to learn more about this topic, I can really recommend this video from Game Maker's Toolkit. It's a great game design channel. Yeah, and with that, if we still have time for questions, we can do some questions. Yes?
At which point in the game development pipeline should you avoid taking game-changing feedback?
Depends on the feedback, it depends on your game's direction. There are some people who think that when you created, for example, a good mechanics and a good sandbox, you should still then maybe make the game's direction very malleable with and go with the audience. It really depends on that if you want to make a certain game or a find your fun kind of game, because then it's really depends, I'd say. Also, just more games are more rigid in the way you need to make them, then you would probably stop listening to that kind of direction changing feedback very early on. Like if you see any AAA game, for example, of course these are problems you can still see in many failing AAA games that come out as a complete mess. Like stuff like, what was it, Mind's Eye, I think, was one that was way too many things for way too many people. And also Anthem, famously, was very directionless and direction changing during development. So problems with this happens all the time in big projects and in small projects. But of the small projects that fail, you most often don't hear about them anymore. Well, another question?
Especially for small teams, do you have any recommendations for how to deal with a signal to noise ratio when you have not a big amount of playtests?
No, you don't have the experience in that case. I only have personal experience with controlled testing environments and controlled playtests. I think it's also, if in that case, guessing from your experience, you're probably asking about already in development games already out, feedback for that. Or did you also get?
I mean, especially for like indie devs always have the problem, like they're either too afraid or they have a hard time like finding a lot of playtesters that are not their friends or their close group. And it's always, I find it's always hard to filter out like the well-meaning noise in that feedback. So
I think what's in some indie circles, you don't really hear that you should always have a target audience in mind. It's still also valid for video games, and search where that target audience is. Maybe even just in genre overlap. In one of the talks in the meetups in Vienna, was the developer of Hop4, game about frogs, an auto battler about frogs. and he just posted on the frogs subreddit because it's a subreddit with multiple million people on it somehow, and he got some players from that, and that's how you get one way to get at least people that would be interested in that, that give you at least a very different opinion on it.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you make mobile games, I think it's very hard, and specific social games, to get unbiased or well-meaning feedback, because if you search on Discord or on the Steam forums, you will get very different players.
Yeah.
So I don't really have tips, but I see, yeah, it's very hard, and you should definitely think outside of the box, and maybe more in general marketing, the way marketing for target audiences works, and try to get a channel to contact these people. Any more questions?
Yeah,
Yes.
I hope I can formulate that question properly, but what do you think is like the cutoff point for listening to feedback if you have a good idea? Because there are people who work on, like, you know, very personal ideas that almost go into the esoteric almost, and then they should probably listen to feedback. But then on the other hand, there are good ideas that the customers don't even know they want. So
That is very hard, yeah.
so for example, nobody knew they wanted Minecraft, for example, or they didn't know it until they saw it. Let's say it like this. So where is the cutoff point where you listen to somebody else's opinion about your ideas?
I think there's not really a clear cutoff point. Like with the Darren pretty much asked is in a similar vein, but maybe we go to it from this perspective. When can you know that it is a good idea?
Yeah.
Maybe you can't until the end,
Yeah.
but you can definitely prototype the systems themselves and add on to that and do very, very basic prototypes, and you can validate them. And that is the point where you definitely should listen, and where you can validate if your idea really works. And it is very rare that you can only validate these game ideas at the end of the project, because mostly it's, even when you say, no, it doesn't work without the graphics, without the great photorealistic graphics, yeah, but you're not, when you validate the game design, you're not validating the graphics, then you have an issue with the perception of your own idea, because then you can't really analyze what the core game design idea of your thing is, the core mechanic or the core system. So I'd say after you've nailed the core system and validated that this works, whatever it is, like with Minecraft, pretty much when the alpha was done, it didn't really, if you look at it today, it didn't really change that much, at least the Java version. And it still works. It worked then, and they could validate it then. But yeah, you need to progress until that part, until you can validate it.
So basically, incrementally doing.
Yeah. So after that one, maybe just a little bit to make it even better, and then you should stop for these kind of feedbacks and directions. Any more questions?
You mentioned like people should log a lot when they
Yes.
build analytics, and I found when we were making games that it's, so you can approach it from two angles. Either you say, okay, in the beginning, these are the things I want to know about, and those analytics I implement, or you implement a lot and try to interpret it afterwards. And I found it quite cumbersome to build a lot of logging into it, and that data that we actually needed, we missed. Do you have any recommendations on how do you find out what should I log, what should I not log? Because I cannot log every code line.
Experience. To be honest, I only know this because I did way too much log diving for days because we logged too much, and it's hard for certain games, I think. But at least don't wait until the end of the project when you say, okay, now I'm heading up to the finish line to my release, and now I edit. No, you should edit probably before you do the first playtest. At least if it's big enough that you can't fully stay on you can't focus on the screen while you see the playtest. But yeah, you definitely an experience, I think.
Okay. One follow-up. Sorry. Oh, one
Yes.
follow-up question to this one. So you said you should add logging as soon as possible, basically, or
Yeah.
rather early in the development process. Is that because you want the data you collected, you want that data to guide the development process, or what's the reason for this as early as possible? Earlier is better, right? But
Yeah,
why?
because you want to validate still if your idea works, and you do playtests to validate it, because otherwise you would just do the game and release
I
it.
see. So you would get the logs generated by the playtests and evaluate those.
Yeah, and you can see it as like an example when you. Yeah, let's do just if you do a platformer or something, you can maybe log that when the player gets a coin or when the player gets some special items, and with that you can validate even or when he starts and ends that he found certain things or didn't find certain things. Maybe you need to adapt your level design there. So in that way, this can already help you in early stages. Or maybe you have some kind of skill in your game, and the player didn't use it at all. Then you probably didn't tell the player in the right way of this kind of play. And this happens all the time in early stages, since the UI just isn't done. And it's all I wrote it in the menu in the introduction screen that you can use this. And in early demos, not everyone reads this.
Well, if you, let's say, hypothetically, if you were to record every playtest session, you wouldn't need logs, right? Because you could, and if you had infinite time to watch the video.
Yes,
I know it's hypothetical, but still, in theory. So, reduced to a more realistic scale, let's say I have 2 people a week playtest my game for 15 minutes each, and that's something I can record and manage to watch and evaluate the video. Then I wouldn't need, then I would get no real advantage by logging, right?
Yeah.
Because everything I need to know is in the video.
Yeah, it's just a different kind of data gathering. Then it's just
Okay,
visual
yeah,
data, but it's still
understand
the data you can
Makes
evaluate.
sense. Yeah, I was implicitly thinking of lots of video recording while playtesting, because to me, would you say recording video is still a good idea? Would you say it's kind of the gold standard? Because especially if you also would be able to watch the people playing and see their reactions, the unspoken ones.
It really depends. If you do a very small game that you gather feedback very fast online to like platforms like itch, then no, definitely focus on something you can also gather remote, because there are frameworks for that, even for these little platforms where you can. I've read a post on some Discord that some person used the Google Analytics AI for the itch.io project somehow and fed their data over that. I have no idea how it worked. So, but there are multiple ways to do this kind of data gathering in small projects. But if it's something with special physical components, like something I didn't get into, but I've heard of from the same game designer on the project, where they had a cooperative multiplayer experience with multiple screens, and in this kind of setting, it's where you have for different players that needs to solve the same puzzles but with different viewpoints. You should definitely do video recording, because then it matters very much to see on the one hand what happens on each screen, but also additional recording to see how the people cooperate.
Makes sense, because for every player you have a separate stream of events basically to look through, and it can be difficult to correlate those afterwards.
Yes.
After the fact. Would you say that it's a good idea to start playtesting with recording? Because you mentioned earlier that experience should guide what you log, right? What kind of events you're interested in. Would you say that by watching the videos you get a feeling for which events are important and which aren't? Because I think that might be a good idea.
Yeah, could definitely be.
Because if you start out with no idea which events you want to log later, I think it's a good idea to have a video and then watch, and then by watching you see common behavior across different playthroughs. And then I think from that you could deduce which events are important, which aren't.
If it's always controlled playtests, then it's good, but otherwise you also think about DSGVO, because you
Oh,
can't
okay,
just
no
record people.
Yeah,
So
well, you
that's
need,
we get in the whole
consent,
issues
of
if you
course,
record
yeah.
it too much.
You would collect the consent, of course.
Yeah.
Makes sense, thanks.
In terms of data you get into your system, either it's through video and you get uploads in a network share or somewhere, or you get like log events, or you get structured logging and filter that somehow. What's the cutoff point to switch from get everything, like you start the session and then you record everything and then you send up everything into some system, or you go into statistical sampling? Is it the decision to be, oh yeah, I have to move the system how logs are consumed and structured and analyzed, or is it more how much can I handle and how much is actually going in? Because if you have, the solution will be very different for like a few thousand players to a few million.
Yeah. If you use this data for bug fixing, leave it in as long as you can, I'd say, because you can still have very special kind of bugs you need to see what happened before it, when your game is already in production. But otherwise, the same as why you do playtests, you want to validate some ideas, some mechanics that it worked and want to show it to players, of course also a marketing point of view. But if you see it from the validating game design and the state of your game, you also gather data for that. And if you validated that it worked, then you probably don't need that data anymore. Or you need to change it if you want to validate it again in the future. So it really depends on that. If you still want to validate it, keep it. But then, yeah, someday you will get complete data bloat.
That's your example with Slay the Spire and the Madness card. It was like, yeah,
yeah, but
develop the game and then you.
There we're talking about millions
Yeah.
of data sets. But I don't really know why this. I mean, it's still an active development. That's the thing. They still want to balance it because it has a multiplayer component. Not the first one has a leaderboard component at least. And when you do stuff like this or daily challenges, you still need to track this data, and you still want to use it to do this kind of balances. It really that also depends on the project. If you say, yeah, you finished on release, then it doesn't matter that much. If you say, yeah, I want to support it for 3 years with content. Any more questions?
Just, just one more. Do you know if people are applying AI to like make sense of this big mess of data already, or do you have any systems you know?
We had a talk last time about AI to
it was too
review,
late last.
to review,
okay.
to get Steam reviews, to get data from Steam reviews. I would say when you really try to get certain aspects from it, you should definitely use the AI, and I bet many people will. Personally, I'd say if I need to use AI to gather my data in the proper way or aggregate what I want to know, then I probably did the data logging wrong.
Okay.
Because I personally don't really want to use it for that kind of stuff. It gets too, if it fantasizes too much
Yeah,
in
too
that
much
direction, I get,
hallucination.
yeah. Okay.
For any further questions, we can mingle as long as we want.
Yes.
Can ask personal questions there.